Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It all began on a bright Saturday afternoon when a stray frisbee and a domineering neighbor collided in a way that would forever alter the quiet routine of our community. The incident took place at the community park of Tranquil Ridge Estates, a place meant for family enjoyment and leisurely pursuits. I, Samuel Rivers, a recently widowed accountant striving to rebuild a stable life for my children, never imagined that a simple act of play could unleash a torrent of neighborhood drama. My two children, Ava, aged 10, and Ethan, aged 8, had moved to Tranquil Ridge Estates in search of a fresh start after the loss of their mother. Their radiant energy and innocent curiosity had been our beacon of hope amid sorrow. That day, as Ava energetically honed her frisbee skills and Ethan followed faithfully at her heels, our playful routine suddenly took an unexpected turn. One errant throw sent the frisbee sailing dangerously across the park and almost colliding with a sunbather who was taking advantage of the clear skies. The unsuspecting victim of this airborne mishap was none other than Veronica Sterling, an imposing woman who had fashioned herself as the self-appointed enforcer of every trivial community norm. Known for her aggressive insistence on order, Veronica was reclining on a meticulously arranged floral towel, sipping on a suspiciously generous margarita when the frisbee came dangerously close. With an outburst that resonated across the manicured lawns, she shrieked, "Watch it, you hooligans," clutching her chest as if the wayward disc had threatened her very existence. Ava, with the utmost politeness and genuine concern, hurried over to Veronica and murmured, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Are you all right?" But Veronica's icy glare and cutting retort, "Do you even live here? I haven't seen you brats before," left no room for apology. She continued, dismissing any justification with haughty disdain, declaring that the park was a haven for mature adults, not a playground for unruly youngsters. I happened to be passing by with our beloved golden retriever, Buddy, when I caught the tail end of this verbal skirmish. Stepping in to mediate, I introduced myself as Samuel Rivers and explained that Ava and Ethan lived right there at 22, Willow Lane. I tried to reason with Veronica, insisting that the children were simply playing and meant no harm. However, her posture of self-righteous authority remained unyielding. As the tension rippled outward, it became painfully clear that her tirade was less about the frisbee and more about asserting her power in this corner of the neighborhood. That seemingly ordinary playtime incident planted the seed of conflict, a spark that promised to ignite far more than a minor scuffle. Little did we know that this confrontation was only the first chapter in a long battle against bullying and subtle discrimination. In that moment, the community's facade of suburban tranquility began to crack, and the true test of our resilience and sense of justice was only just beginning. In the days following the park incident, life in Tranquil Ridge Estates began to wear a darker hue. What started as an isolated occurrence quickly evolved into a string of minor yet persistent provocations that made Samuel Rivers feel increasingly cornered in his own neighborhood. Although he had hoped for a fresh start for himself and his children, Ava, a spirited 10-year-old, and Ethan, a curious 8-year-old, their arrival at 22, Willow Lane had inadvertently sparked the ire of Veronica Sterling. The first sign of trouble arrived in the form of a passive-aggressive note that was taped neatly to Samuel's front door. The message, scrawled in an uninviting hand, chastised him for having a lawn far less manicured than expected. Samuel frowned as he read the note, knowing full well that his modest yard bore the honest marks of a busy family life. But this was only the beginning. Not long after, he discovered another, more insidious message threaded through the mailbox. A crisp envelope from Gladys Perwinkle, the ever-loyal assistant to Veronica, warned him about excessive noise emanating from his home. In reality, Ethan had only been practicing his trumpet, filling their modest space with innocent sound. Each small incident piled up like a series of subtle strikes against his dignity. Every note and every voice raised in disdain hinted at a larger campaign of harassment. Samuel could not help but notice that, behind the veneer of community standards, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of intolerance. It wasn't just that the children had been playing too boisterously. It was as if their very presence disrupted the established order of Tranquil Ridge Estates, a place where Veronica, self-appointed custodian of decorum, ruled with an iron will. Conversations with other neighbors over the next few days revealed mixed reactions. Some residents quietly commiserated with Samuel, sharing their own grievances against Veronica's overreaching strictness. Others, however, remained tight-lipped, their eyes filled with fear of rocking the boat in an environment where the HOA and its favored enforcer, Veronica Sterling, held sway. Samuel soon realized that the conflict had transcended a simple case of suburban squabbling. It was now a question of respect, fairness, and the right to peacefully raise children without needless intimidation. At home, the tension seeped into every aspect of daily life. Ava and Ethan, though still bright and playful, began to pick up on their father's somber mood. Samuel took care to explain that sometimes adults have disputes over differences in opinion, but that it was important to stand by one's truth. Even as he reassured his children, a steely determination grew within him. He resolved not only to protect his family but also to stand up for their right to enjoy the community's amenities without fear of undue harassment. Late one evening, after tucking the children into bed, Samuel sat at his kitchen table and reviewed the morning's mail. Among the letters and subtle insults lay the undeniable proof of a pattern of bias, and, he realized, a breach of the community's own standards. He recalled that the HOA bylaws included protections for residents against undue harassment or discrimination. His heart pounded with resolve as he contemplated his next steps. He would not let Veronica Sterling and her cronies dictate the quality of life at Tranquil Ridge Estates. As the night deepened, Samuel began drafting mental notes of incidents that had piled up, the note about the lawn, the pointed comments at the mailbox, and even the dismissive tone that Veronica had used during their brief encounter in the park. He knew that action was imperative, for the atmosphere was not only souring the community, it was threatening to erode the very foundation of respect that should bind neighbors together. In the silence of that kitchen, with determination echoing in every word he wrote, Samuel Rivers resolved that he would fight back. Not with anger, but with the unyielding power of accountability and clear, documented proof. The days ahead would demand courage. He would prepare his case carefully, determined to shine a light on the unjust practices that were poisoning the neighborhood. This was not simply about an errant frisbee or noisy trumpet practice. This was about defending his family's dignity and ensuring that every resident of Tranquil Ridge Estates was allowed their peaceful enjoyment without discrimination. A week after the initial incidents, the community park once again became the stage for an innocent yet fateful occurrence. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and Samuel Rivers watched from the window of his modest home as Ava and Ethan once again ventured into the park for playtime. This time, the children arrived armed not with frisbees, but with bubbles and chalk, symbols of unbridled childhood creativity. Ava gleefully drew vibrant hopscotch grids on the pavement while Ethan blew bubbles that shimmered like tiny rainbows in the bright light. For the first moments, the park was transformed into a haven of carefree delight. Neighbors smiled as the children's laughter echoed against neatly trimmed hedges, and the joy in their play seemed to dispel all previous tensions. But soon, as if by design, the quiet harmony was shattered. Veronica Sterling emerged from her usual sunbathing corner, her perfectly arranged floral towel and oversized margarita in hand. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the sight, chalk markings streaking across the pavement and iridescent bubbles drifting lazily over the manicured lawns. With a shriek that startled even the most composed parkgoers, Veronica bellowed, "This is an abuse of common space. Keep your messy creations away from here, or you will disrupt the peaceful ambience." Her voice, crisp and uncompromising, ignited whispers among the gathered crowd. Samuel, who had been inside managing some paperwork, had his phone ring almost immediately, a call from the Pleasant Valley Police Department. His pulse quickened as he answered. The official's tone was laced with confusion. "Mr. Rivers, we have received a report that there is a disturbance at the community park. Unauthorized activities are taking place that could potentially lower property values." Samuel's heart sank. What disturbance could possibly be attributed to bubbles and chalk? He ended the call with a heavy sigh, grabbed his keys, and rushed out with his faithful golden retriever, Buddy, trotting faithfully by his side. Arriving at the scene, Samuel found the situation already spiraling into farce. Two young police officers hovered near the swings, exchanging awkward glances while trying to assess the situation. In the midst of it all, Veronica Sterling, red-faced and fuming, was pointing a trembling finger at Ava and Ethan. The children stood there, bewildered. Ava's bubble wand drooped in her small hand and Ethan's chalk was abandoned on the pavement. Their once joyful play had turned into a spectacle of public embarrassment. Officer Miller, with an expression of disbelief, confronted Samuel. "Mr. Rivers, are you aware that your children's activities here have been reported as a disturbance?" he asked in a tone that mixed incredulity with professional concern. Before Samuel could respond, Veronica interjected furiously, "They don't belong here. This park is for established families, not for rowdy, transient elements that lower our property values." Her words spilled out like venom, each syllable further darkening the afternoon's tone. Samuel's anger swelled as he listened. The absurdity of the situation, children blowing bubbles and drawing on the sidewalk, had been twisted into a pretext for discrimination. "Are you seriously calling the police because my children are playing?" Samuel demanded, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "This is not just about bubbles and chalk. It's about prejudice, and it stops now." The officers exchanged uneasy looks. Officer Miller, clearly taken aback by Samuel's directness, attempted to restore calm. "Sir, we're trying to maintain order here," he said, but his words faltered as Veronica's tirade continued. The situation had escalated beyond a mere misunderstanding, it had become a public display of intolerance. Amidst the chaos, Samuel knelt to comfort Ava and Ethan. "Don't worry, kids," he whispered, gathering them into a protective embrace. Their eyes, wide with confusion and hurt, searched his face for reassurance. In that tender moment, Samuel vowed that he would not allow this public shaming to define his family's experience in Tranquil Ridge Estates. As the police attempted to de-escalate matters, eventually advising Veronica to return home and promising to follow up on the complaint about unauthorized activities, Samuel's resolve solidified. This was a turning point, a spark that would transform his passive acceptance into determined resistance. The laughter of his children, though momentarily stifled by embarrassment, would soon become the anthem of their fight for justice. Walking back toward his home, Samuel's mind raced with thoughts of how to counter the blatant bias that had invaded their peaceful lives. The day's farcical events were more than a series of isolated incidents, they were the overture to a battle for dignity, fairness, and the right of every child to play without fear. And now, with bubbles scattered across the sunlit pavement as silent witnesses, Samuel Rivers knew his fight had only just begun. In the aftermath of the chaotic park scene, the community's simmering tensions reached a fever pitch. Samuel Rivers, still reeling from the disheartening police intervention, felt both anger and determination surge within him. He spent the evening consoling Ava and Ethan, assuring them that no one had the right to shame them for simply enjoying their childhood. But as the sun set over Tranquil Ridge Estates, Samuel knew that silence would not be enough. He needed to confront this injustice head-on. The next morning, Samuel walked into the community center with a heavy heart and a resolve steeled by the previous day's events. Word had spread quickly, and murmurs of discontent resonated throughout the neighborhood corridors. Samuel's mind replayed every disparaging remark Veronica Sterling had hurled, her insistence that the playful activities were a blight on our community, and that they endangered property values. The blatant prejudice was unmistakable, and Samuel knew he had to set the record straight. At the local police station, Officer Miller, who still appeared unsettled by the incident, met Samuel in the lobby. "Mr. Rivers, I do apologize if our intervention this morning caused you further distress," he said, his tone gentle yet unsure. Samuel shook his head, replying, "It's not about the police, Officer Miller. It's about a neighbor using public resources, and her status, as a shield for discrimination." His words hung in the air as he recounted the humiliation and the targeted remarks. Officer Miller's eyes reflected both regret and a dawning understanding of the deeper issues at hand. Meanwhile, across town, Veronica Sterling remained defiant. But as the day unfolded, her outbursts grew more erratic. In casual conversations at the local coffee shop, other residents began sharing similar tales of her unwarranted behavior, notes on unkempt lawns and passive-aggressive warnings about noise. Samuel listened carefully as whispers of communal discontent took shape. He realized that Veronica's tyranny was not isolated, it was a symptom of an environment where fear of confrontation kept many silent. Samuel returned home and sat at his dining table, drafting notes with meticulous care. Determined to document every incident, he listed the events from the park debacle, the subsequent police call, and even the snide comments made when he had attempted a peaceful explanation. He organized his thoughts not only to fuel his own resolve but also to build a case that could be presented to the HOA later. Every detail mattered: proof of harassment, evidence of discrimination, and a clear timeline that would expose the inconsistency between the neighborhood's ideals and its reality. That evening, as he reviewed the bylaw sections related to resident treatment in the HOA handbook, Samuel's mind sharpened. He found the critical clause that affirmed every resident's right to enjoy their property without undue harassment or discrimination. His pulse quickened with a mixture of hope and determination. This was the foothold he needed, a chance to challenge Veronica Sterling's unchecked authority and to restore decency to Tranquil Ridge Estates. Samuel decided it was time to speak up at the next HOA meeting. He knew that confronting this issue would require not only precise documentation but also an unwavering moral stance. In that darkened room of quiet frustration and simmering anger, Samuel resolved that justice would be served not by retaliation alone, but by exposing the truth to every member of his community. On the eve of the meeting, Samuel reached out to a few trusted neighbors who had quietly experienced Veronica's tyranny. With calm conviction, he explained his plan to file a formal complaint, citing the very bylaws meant to protect residents from exactly this type of harassment. Though the prospect of challenging a figure as influential as Veronica Sterling was daunting, the need for truth and fairness outweighed the fear of reprisal. As Samuel finally prepared for sleep that night, his thoughts churned with the enormity of what lay ahead. He knew the coming days would test his resolve and that the battle for respect in Tranquil Ridge Estates was far from over. But as he closed his eyes, he held tight to the memory of his children's laughter from the park, even the echoes of bubbles and chalk, and promised himself that no injustice would go unanswered. The path of accountability had been set, and tomorrow, Samuel Rivers would take the next decisive step in reclaiming the dignity that belonged to every resident of his cherished community. In the days that followed the police intervention, Samuel Rivers shifted from anger to action. With quiet determination burning within him, he set out to gather irrefutable evidence of Veronica Sterling's ongoing harassment and blatant discrimination. Every small incident now formed part of a larger narrative, a pattern that demanded to be exposed. Samuel began by meticulously recording the dates and times of each abusive note, every whispered remark caught in hushed corridors, and even the sideways glances that had become all too common whenever he passed by Veronica. He spent hours poring over the HOA handbook, searching for the clause that would serve as the cornerstone of his case. Finally, his eyes rested upon Section 4, subsection C, paragraph 7, a provision that guaranteed every resident the reasonable enjoyment of their property free from undue harassment or discrimination. Samuel's heart pounded as he printed out multiple copies of the relevant pages. This legal footing was precisely what he needed. Armed with clear documentation of the park incident, the passive-aggressive memos on his door and mailbox, and the chilling words that Veronica had unleashed in public, Samuel began drafting a formal complaint to the HOA. His fingers trembled on the keyboard as he narrated every painful detail. He recounted the day in the park, the furious outburst over a stray frisbee and the subsequent police call triggered by innocent bubbles and sidewalk chalk. He described the demeaning language, the insinuations about property values, and, most damning of all, the disparaging remarks that hinted at prejudice against his children. Samuel's words were carefully chosen, each sentence building a case that was both logical and profoundly emotional. Once his complaint was complete, Samuel took copies to every other resident he trusted in Tranquil Ridge Estates. Some neighbors were quick to offer their support, others listened in silence, their eyes reflecting both sympathy and fear. He made sure to include detailed photographs of the written notes, crisp evidence that could not be dismissed as a mere misunderstanding. Among the responses he received, a few residents admitted that they too had been on the receiving end of Veronica's tyrannical behavior. Their shared stories of petty bullying and authoritarian micromanagement painted a picture of a leader who wielded her power carelessly. Meanwhile, word of Samuel's efforts began circulating through the community. Whispers of dissent grew louder as more neighbors acknowledged that their once idyllic neighborhood was gradually being poisoned by Veronica's unchecked behavior. Samuel received messages of encouragement from residents who had long suffered in silence. Some expressed admiration for his courage, while others, bound by fear of reprisals from the formidable HOA structure, chose to remain cautiously neutral. At home, Samuel made extra time to reassure Ava and Ethan. He explained, in gentle, age-appropriate terms, that sometimes people in power misuse their authority, but that standing up for what is right is essential. His children, though confused by the adult world's complexity, listened intently as their father promised that their home would always be a place of kindness and fairness. In a decisive moment late one night, Samuel compiled all the evidence into a well-organized dossier. He labeled each document and photo, highlighting the date, source, and nature of the offense. This dossier would be his key in the upcoming HOA board meeting, where he was determined to confront not just Veronica Sterling but the very system that had allowed her to bully the residents of Tranquil Ridge Estates with impunity. Before he turned off the light, Samuel looked over the neatly bound pages and felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. He knew that taking this step might invite backlash, but the desire for justice for his family, and for everyone in the community, drove him onward. The fight was no longer just about a rogue frisbee or a momentary police call, it had transformed into a crusade to reclaim the integrity and inclusivity of their shared home. As dawn approached and the first rays of sunlight seeped through the window, Samuel Rivers whispered a quiet vow to himself: no injustice, however small, would be allowed to go unchallenged. In that silent promise, the foundation was laid for a battle that would soon shake the very core of Tranquil Ridge Estates. The following week, anticipation spread through Tranquil Ridge Estates like wildfire. Samuel Rivers had distributed his comprehensive dossier, and reactions ranged from cautious optimism to outright defiance. Determined to build a united front, Samuel reached out to neighbors who had long felt marginalized by Veronica Sterling's authoritarian rule. At small gatherings in backyards and over phone calls, shared stories of petty tyrannies emerged. Many recalled receiving insidious notes, enduring unsolicited critiques about their property, or witnessing berating behavior that left them feeling diminished. One brisk morning, Samuel organized an informal meeting on a quiet street corner near his home. Several residents, many hesitant at first but emboldened by Samuel's conviction, gathered together. Among them were neighbors who had endured similar injustices, Mrs. Jenkins, who had been repeatedly criticized for her unpruned rose bushes, and Mr. Carter, whose misplaced garbage can had once become a target of Veronica's wrath. Their voices, initially soft and uncertain, gradually found strength as they described the common thread of intolerance and rule enforcement that Veronica had imposed. Samuel spoke with quiet authority, reiterating the words from the HOA bylaws that guaranteed every resident's right to enjoy their property in peace. "We are not asking for special treatment," he told the small crowd, "but merely the basic respect and dignity that every member of this community deserves." The collective nods and murmurs of agreement instilled a cautious hope. Samuel made it clear that the forthcoming HOA board meeting would be their moment to assert this right, a meeting where they would present not just his dossier, but also the voices of those who had been affected. In parallel, Samuel reached out to a local civil rights organization, the Coalition for Justice. He explained the systematic harassment and subtle discrimination that had infiltrated their community. The organization, outraged by the evidence of bias, agreed to send a representative to the HOA meeting. Their involvement injected an additional layer of credibility into Samuel's cause and signaled to the residents that this was not merely a family squabble, but a stand against systemic intolerance. Over the next few days, Samuel tirelessly coordinated with residents to ensure that their concerns were recorded. Emails, handwritten notes, and even recorded testimonies began to circulate among the members of the HOA. Samuel set up a discreet online forum where neighbors could anonymously share their experiences, ensuring that every grievance, no matter how seemingly trivial, was documented. This digital archive of shared pain and hope became a symbol of unity in the face of adversity. At home, Samuel balanced these community meetings with moments of gentle reassurance to Ava and Ethan. Sometimes, he explained one evening as he tucked them into bed, standing up for what is right means facing obstacles, but it also brings us closer together. His words resonated with the children, who began to understand that their laughter and play were precious and worth protecting. With each passing day, more residents began to prepare for the upcoming HOA board meeting, scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center. Samuel personally visited homes, ensuring that everyone understood the importance of coming forward. The mood was a blend of determination and trepidation, a collective commitment to challenge a long-standing tyranny, even as fear of possible retribution lingered. On the eve of the meeting, as twilight settled over Tranquil Ridge Estates, Samuel gazed out his window at the silent streets and whispered a final prayer for courage and unity. He knew that the board meeting would determine not only the fate of Veronica Sterling but also the spirit of the entire community. With his dossier in one hand and the voices of his neighbors in the other, Samuel Rivers prepared to step into the fray, hopeful that the coming confrontation would be the catalyst for lasting change. The night of the HOA board meeting arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxious energy. Inside the community center of Tranquil Ridge Estates, a large room buzzed with the presence of residents who had finally gathered to make their voices heard. Samuel Rivers, dossier clutched tightly under his arm, took his place among a diverse group of homeowners. The room was packed with determined faces, each one a testament to the shared suffering at the hands of Veronica Sterling's petty tyranny. At the head of the table sat Arthur Finch, the mild-mannered president of the HOA, whose expression betrayed his discomfort as tensions built. Gladys Perwinkle, Veronica's perennial ally, lingered close by with her notepad, ready to defend every decision made by the now embattled Veronica. Throughout the room, whispers and subdued conversations revealed that many residents had experiences similar to Samuel's. Some, like Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Carter, stood ready to testify, others, too frightened by potential reprisals, offered only silent nods of support. When the board finally called the meeting to order, Samuel knew his moment had arrived. Rising steadily, he began to speak with a voice firm yet filled with the weight of every personal and communal slight. He recounted, in vivid detail, the series of incidents that had plagued their community, from the day a rogue frisbee led to Veronica Sterling's furious outburst, to the barrage of passive-aggressive notes and the blatant police call triggered by innocent bubbles and sidewalk chalk. Every word was underscored by his resolve to defend not only his own family's honor but the fundamental right of every resident to enjoy their property without fear or discrimination. Throughout his address, Samuel cited the relevant portion of the HOA bylaws, Section 4, Subsection C, Paragraph 7, asserting that every member was entitled to reasonable enjoyment of their home, free from undue harassment. He then introduced a representative from the Coalition for Justice, who spoke eloquently about the need to combat prejudice and uphold community values. One by one, other residents came forward. Their testimonies painted a consistent picture. Veronica Sterling had repeatedly used her position to enforce arbitrary rules, to police the simple joys of life, and even to demean residents based on personal biases. Veronica, seated at the far end of the table, listened in silence, at first with apparent confidence, then with growing apprehension as the evidence mounted. When it was finally her turn to respond, her voice trembled as she attempted to justify her actions. But the room, now united in its determination to reject intolerance, grew increasingly hostile to her excuses. Arthur Finch cleared his throat and, with measured finality, stated, "In light of the overwhelming evidence and the heartfelt testimonies presented today, the board has reached a decision." A hush fell over the assembly as Finch delivered the verdict. Veronica Sterling was hereby stripped of her leadership position in the HOA and was suspended from voting privileges for 1 year. The announcement was met with a wave of applause and subdued cheers. For many residents, it was a long overdue vindication, a clear statement that harassment and discrimination had no place in Tranquil Ridge Estates. Veronica's face, once a mask of haughty authority, now flushed with shock and anger, offered little as she attempted a rebuttal. The meeting ended with a sense of catharsis and renewed hope. Samuel's eyes met those of his neighbors, and in that silent exchange, an unspoken promise was made: together, they would safeguard their community against any future tyranny. As the meeting adjourned, residents lingered, discussing plans for rebuilding a more inclusive environment. Samuel gathered his documents, feeling a heavy burden lift from his shoulders. The battle was not over, he knew, but this decisive moment had opened the door for real change, a change that would secure a peaceful future for families like his, where every child could play freely and every resident could thrive without fear. In the days that followed the landmark HOA board meeting, a palpable sense of relief began to spread throughout Tranquil Ridge Estates. Veronica Sterling's abrupt removal from power marked the end of an era of petty tyranny. As the news rippled through the neighborhood, residents began to breathe easier. Samuel Rivers, though still bearing the emotional weight of past indignities, found solace in the victory that had been hard-fought. The community center, once a venue for heated disputes, transformed into a space for healing and unity. Neighbors who had long felt intimidated now felt empowered to share laughter in the park again. The once cold corridors of their shared environment warmed as people began to openly discuss plans for community events designed to rebuild trust. Flyers for a neighborhood picnic and a family fun day began appearing on doorsteps, and the murmurs of solidarity grew louder with each passing day. At home, Samuel took a quiet moment to embrace Ava and Ethan. Over dinner one evening, as the children recounted playful moments from the park and their newfound friendships with other residents, Samuel's heart swelled with hope. He recounted the events of the meeting in simplified terms, emphasizing the importance of standing together against unfairness. The children, reassured by his calm determination, laughed and played as if the dark days were finally behind them. Meanwhile, whispers of long-suppressed grievances continued to circulate, and many neighbors expressed their gratitude by coming forward with their own stories of being under the thumb of Veronica Sterling's regime. Even some who had once sided with her publicly now admitted their regret. The tide of change was undeniable, and as the community began to let go of past fears, a spirit of collaboration took root. Although the legal and emotional battles were far from over, the immediate threat of unchecked discrimination had been contained. Samuel, bolstered by the support of his fellow residents, began quietly planning for a long-term strategy to strengthen community engagement and ensure that every voice was heard. It was clear that the removal of Veronica Sterling was not merely a punitive action, it was a call for a renewed, inclusive vision of Tranquil Ridge Estates. One crisp morning, as sunlight danced across freshly mowed lawns and children's laughter filled the air, Samuel took a solitary walk through the neighborhood. He paused to greet a couple of neighbors chatting by their mailboxes and felt, for the first time in a long while, that the community was truly his home. The oppressive shadow that had once loomed over their daily lives was receding, replaced by a cautious optimism that promised brighter days ahead. In that new dawn, each resident's right to peace and dignity was vindicated, and a foundation was laid for lasting change. Samuel Rivers knew that the battle against prejudice required vigilance, but for now, the victory heralded a future where everyone could celebrate life's simple joys without fear. The seeds of unity had been sown, and Tranquil Ridge Estates was beginning to blossom once again into the warm, welcoming community it was always meant to be. In the weeks after the board meeting, an air of quiet celebration mixed with introspection settled over Tranquil Ridge Estates. Samuel Rivers often found himself reflecting on the tumultuous days that had led to this turning point. Late in the evenings, when the children were asleep and the neighborhood lay silent, he would pore over the evidence he'd gathered and the testimonies shared by his neighbors. Each document, each statement, had not only exposed injustice but had also kindled a newfound sense of empowerment throughout the community. Small gatherings became more frequent in the days that followed. Neighbors met in front yards, at local cafes, and even in the community center to discuss ideas for rebuilding the social fabric that had been torn apart by years of autocratic rule. At these informal meetings, conversations often circled back to that fateful day in the park, when innocent play was mistakenly branded as a disturbance, and the resolute stand taken by Samuel Rivers. Their collective stories underscored that the struggle was not simply personal, but emblematic of a broader fight for dignity and respect. For many, the most profound impact was the change in spirit. Once cautious residents began stepping forward to contribute ideas for neighborhood improvement. Some organized block parties, while others coordinated volunteer cleanup efforts, determined to reclaim the community's shared spaces. The transformation in attitude was palpable, where fear had once dictated silence, boldness and unity now reigned. Samuel also continued to check in with Ava and Ethan, ensuring that the scars of humiliation faded in the light of genuine, lasting love. The children, once burdened by the harsh words and unwarranted interventions, began to regain their carefree laughter. Their tentative smiles were no longer reminders of past pain but symbols of hope emerging from adversity. As new plans for community activities took shape, a general meeting was organized. Not a formal HOA session, but a casual forum where everyone could express their ideas and grievances in an open, supportive environment. At this gathering, Samuel listened as neighbors recounted their journeys from helplessness to empowerment, and many expressed sincere gratitude for the change that had come over Tranquil Ridge Estates. For Samuel, these moments of communal reflection reinforced his belief that the struggle for justice is not fought in isolation. The support and collective courage of his neighbors had transformed a personal battle into a movement for a better, more inclusive neighborhood. Late one evening, after a particularly moving community forum, Samuel sat in his favorite chair and allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He knew that while much work remained, the foundation of respect and collaboration was firmly in place. As the community gradually resumed its daily rhythms, the memory of those dark times became a distant yet powerful reminder. The pain had been real, but so had the triumph of standing up for what was right. In the serene aftermath, every resident of Tranquil Ridge Estates felt emboldened by the knowledge that their voices, when united, could change the course of their shared destiny. A few weeks after the board meeting, an unexpected twist in the community's fate took shape. In a surprising turn of events, several residents nominated Samuel Rivers for the vacant position on the HOA board, a nomination that slowly gained momentum and eventually led to his election as the new leader of Tranquil Ridge Estates. Though Samuel had never envisioned himself as a community politician, he recognized that this responsibility presented an opportunity for lasting positive change. On a clear and brisk morning, Samuel formally accepted the nomination amid mixed emotions. At first, he was hesitant, fearing that stepping into the role might drag him further into the turbulent drama that had so recently scarred the neighborhood. But as he considered the potential to safeguard the community against future injustices and to foster an environment of respect and inclusivity, his reluctance melted away. For him, it was not just about leadership, it was about creating a home where Ava, Ethan, and every resident could thrive without fear or prejudice. Within days, Samuel organized a modest yet spirited community block party. The event was a celebration not merely of his newfound role, but of the community's rebirth after months of division. Music filled the air, food and drinks were shared generously, and laughter, pure and unburdened, echoed around freshly painted fences and flower beds. Children ran freely, their games reinvigorated by a sense of safety and belonging, while the adults mingled and exchanged stories of their collective struggle and triumph. At the heart of the festivities, Samuel made a quiet promise to himself and to every neighbor present. He vowed to use his position in the HOA to ensure that every voice was heard, that no form of harassment would ever be tolerated again, and that inclusivity would become the cornerstone of their communal life. The events of the past were not to be forgotten, instead, they would serve as a reminder of what could be achieved when residents united for a common purpose. In his inaugural address as HOA president, delivered at a subsequent community meeting, the atmosphere was both celebratory and hopeful. Samuel spoke with thoughtful conviction about the need for transparent governance, fair treatment, and continuous dialogue among residents. His speech resonated deeply with many, sparking fresh energy and encouraging even those who had remained silent out of fear to share their perspectives. That evening, as the block party wound down and soft lights were strung across the neighborhood, Samuel took a moment to reflect on the long road that had led him to this point. He recalled the painful episodes of ridicule, the injustice his family had faced, and the courage it took for a community to rise in unison against discrimination. In that reflective quiet, he recognized that the future of Tranquil Ridge Estates was now in the hands of those who valued respect over prejudice and unity over division. Standing amidst the gentle hum of celebration and the joyful sounds of children playing, Samuel Rivers felt a powerful surge of gratitude. The community had faced down a bully, transformed collective anger into positive action, and emerged stronger than before. With the promise of a renewed and vibrant Tranquil Ridge Estates ahead, Samuel embraced his new role with humility and an unwavering commitment to building a brighter future for all.